It's extra drama for Sweet Valley Diaries, book number 31, Taking Sides.
So what does that make me, Miss America?
You don't have to do it again.
Oh, okay.
Hi, I'm your host, Marissa Flaxbart. I'm joined again with Tim Redmond, who was going to do another pass at the subtitle of Taking Sides. You want to?
Oh, absolutely.
I cut you off rudely.
Can Elizabeth outsmart Jessica in the hottest feud ever?
So, we talked at the top of the main episode about the fact that these girls, we can't tell which one is Jessica on the cover.
Yeah.
Which I kind of almost want to give artist James Matthews credit for actually planting a little bit of subtext in the cover, because
That's so interesting.
there is something that we didn't talk about in the main episode, was this subplot that is, or it's not even a plot really, it's just a thread thematically that sets up the next book in the series.
Right.
And it involves Jessica and Elizabeth and the fact that they're identical and not everybody can tell them apart.
Right. And you were saying that actually the cover sort of hints at that, which I think is kind of fascinating. If that was his intention.
I don't know, it's hard to believe, but
Right.
but it's possible. This first comes up so casually as like a mark against Eddie Winters.
Right.
Because Jenny is like, tee-hee, like, Eddie, you know what Eddie told me? It was so funny. He said that he thought you were Elizabeth the other day, and you were Jessica. Isn't that funny? Isn't that so funny? And Jessica is like, maybe if Eddie can't tell that I'm Jessica, then maybe he's not the right guy for me. Like,
right.
But she doesn't stick with that line of thought, but it does pop up.
Yeah, it does come up. I mean, I guess I could understand that, though, if you're like an identical twin. Although, secret bonus information for all you gladiators out there, I actually dated a twin in high school.
Oh my gosh. We have to talk about this.
Okay.
I'm tossing my plans aside. Tell me everything.
No, don't toss your plans aside. I just can't believe I didn't bring it up till now.
Me neither. This is like breaking news.
You're like,
I listen to Gladiators. I spit on my coffee.
I did. I dated a twin, if she's out there in the world, Jennifer Plants and her sister Chris. But I dated Jennifer, and she had a twin sister, Chris. They weren't identical, though. Like, it was very easy to distinguish them apart. Like, they really were, they were twins.
Did they look a lot alike?
Or? Oh, very much
Okay.
But it wasn't like, you need to know them for years to be able to tell them apart. Like, there was just, there were differences, but they were subtle, but that was enough that, like, you never could have played the trick on me, like, send your sister out on a date with me.
That's what I was going to ask.
No. You never could have gotten away with it.
It will likely not surprise you to learn that happens in these books with some regularity.
Right. But if they weren't as, like, defined as Jessica and Elizabeth, but a little bit, and I definitely dated the Jessica.
Great.
There you go.
So, yeah, no, I think that in these books, generally speaking, people don't have trouble telling them apart. Like, they have to really work at pretending to be the other one if they're doing one of the switcheroos.
Okay.
Like, they have to remember to, like, change their personalities.
Yeah.
But, in this book, it is brought up, like, Jeffrey mistakes Elizabeth for Jessica a couple of times. But, like, when they're first meeting. But he's brand new in town.
Sure.
But he says something to Elizabeth right away where he's like, oh, God, I can't believe I made that mistake again. You guys are really very different, aren't you? And Elizabeth is like, oh, yeah, I guess we are. Like, I think that's actually something that piques her interest, which is kind of the inverse of the Eddie thing.
Right.
Jessica's getting turned off of Eddie because he can't tell them apart. And Elizabeth likes that Jeffrey has observed how different they are, even though he did mistake her for them. But he immediately was like, oh, God, that's a really dumb mistake for the new guy to make because clearly you're very different people.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's just, I don't know. We'll have to find out in book 32, but perhaps this is, Jessica's evolution of wanting to strike a path out on her own. Am I reaching here?
Well, Jessica does evolve. It's just that she always just regresses back to the previous Jessica.
Yeah.
During the hiatus, we read a book called Malibu Summer, which was a super edition. These are these books that happen out of the normal sequence of the books. And that was where this question of, is the ghostwriter a Jessica or an Elizabeth came from, because my guest posited that the ghostwriter was a Jessica because Jessica came out looking really good in that book. Oh. She was like a hero.
Okay.
And Elizabeth was doing more scheming than she normally does. So it wasn't a full-on role reversal, but although there were plenty of literal... actually, both of the Super Edition books we read during the hiatus involved the twins pretending to be each other.
Oh, interesting.
Which we'll see if those if that's a continuing theme. Did you have anything else about this book that we didn't get to talk about in the main episode?
I was curious about what sort of time frame they were set in, but it's the 80s, right? This book was written in 1986. Okay.
And yeah, that's when it's set.
And what was what would you say is the prime readership age, or what were they shooting for?
Well, that's a great question. I think that, well, I guess I should just say, we often observe on the books that if you'll open your book to the library information page, you can see that it says age 12 and up in the inside cover of the book, which I have often been like, 12? I don't want 12-year-olds reading this book.
Right.
But I think the idea was that you read them, before you were as old as these girls. It's like the thing they used to say, I don't know if you ever heard, about 17 magazine, that once you got to be 17, you were too old for this magazine.
Oh, right.
It's aspirational.
Right.
But it's weird to think of. That's why I was worried when I expressed in the main episode my concern about the girls. I think about these young girls who are now older than I am, who were, because I was only just alive when this book was written. I was a toddler, and the girls who were 12 reading this, I just think about them and how they were shaped by, even the bad characters. Because I don't know that my impression from interacting largely through the podcast, but also through the blog, sweetvalleydiaries.net, which exists mostly as a place that houses this podcast now, but that was my first entree into talking about Sweet Valley publicly. Mm-hmm. I think that a lot of girls that read these books were totally, they loved Jessica. They identified with Jessica, or else they aspired to be Jessica. Mm-hmm. And then I'm sure there are a lot of girls like myself, little girls reading books, who were Elizabeths, and just knew that more often than not, Jessica's storyline is a cautionary tale.
Right.
But I don't think that that's necessarily how it hit a lot of the readers. I mean, Gladiators, write in. Tell me if you remember reading these books. I know a lot of Gladiators did not read the books when they were growing up. Mm-hmm. I actually didn't read these books when I was growing up. I read Sweet Valley Twins books, which were for even younger girls. Oh. Same characters, but the characters are younger, so they're not quite as acidic. Okay. Is what I would say. They're a little bit more palatable in terms of the nature of the drama that happens.
Right. They're not wearing skimpy outfits at pool parties.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know, I think maybe the soap opera nature of the books and the existence of the Jessica character in the first place lend these books to more of a Jessica type readership than Little Elizabeth's. Probably.
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, I think that's probably right.
It is not hard for me to imagine also middle school, especially middle school age girls, judging each other in the way that these high school girls seem to judge each other.
Yeah.
Did you have any juvenile series books that you read when you were growing up?
That's what I was gonna say. I was trying to figure out what was I reading when I was 12 and 13? Because I did read a lot. I always have been very much an avid reader. I think at that age we were sort of reading things like the Black Stallion series, the Hardy Boys.
Awesome.
Those are the two that really stand out to me that I can remember, like the reading. And then you get a little older, it got more into sort of like, then you're sort of reading the, like Tolkien and things like that.
Sure.
But I think at 12, I don't think you were reading Tolkien. I don't think I was reading Tolkien at 12. I don't think I don't think so. But then I think it was, and it's like similar, very different, right? Because I think the Black Stallion series is really more aimed for boys because it's a little boy and a horse and like things like that. Maybe not.
I really don't know. I don't know. I didn't really read those books. I was reading, I read Babysitter's Club books. But then there's stuff like things that are very gendered, like Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. And I did read some Nancy Drew books growing up.
Yeah.
And then there's Boxcar Children, which is sort of like...
Oh, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe that was later. My favorite books when I was a kid that are only barely a series are these Louis Sachar books called Sideways Stories from Wayside School. But I don't think those came out until the 90s.
Sorry.
They're not really... No, it's okay. You don't have to be sorry. They're actually... I don't know how common these stories are. Oh, God, I loved these books. I still love them, actually. Huh. They're so weird. But that's also... I only thought of it because it's not a gendered thing at all. Right. But a lot of serials are. A lot of them are.
Yeah.
And I think there are more that are probably that are aimed for girls, maybe.
Maybe. That might be true.
I guess then there's stuff like Goosebumps or like Fear Street, like scary ones. But those are for boys and girls, I guess.
Yeah. Boys, it's like getting a 12-year-old boy to sit down and read a book. Boy, that's hard.
Right. Well, and this whole conversation is also kind of like historical looking because I would feel like in the present era, when we talk about, I feel like there's definitely less of an emphasis, or we're trying to have less of an emphasis on the dichotomy at all of like what kids are doing and learning because it's sort of like early programming and so.
Right.
I'm saying that mostly just to make sure the listeners know that I'm aware.
I can tell you in the 70s, they didn't care about that stuff.
Well, that's actually, that's part of what's so interesting about going back and reading what we're presenting to kids when they were younger. Because sometimes it's like, oh, man, I can see how this shaped a generation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That stuff is learned somehow. And if you're, like maybe you're a lonely kid or maybe you don't have a lot of friends and all you're doing is reading books, that's where you're picking it up from.
And all stuff like this, like content made for kids, is made by adults from like the previous generation. Yeah. So unless you really actively are trying to undo the sort of anything that feels a little bit toxic to you from from when you were growing up, you're just going to keep passing it along. Just perpetuate it.
The same harebrained ideas, just one generation to another.
Just, a bunch of little Jessicas and Lilas and Roger Barretts. All right. Well, thank you very much for investigating this topic with me, Tim, and for joining me.
Oh my God, it's been my pleasure.
Tim, all that remains is for us to tease the next book number 32. Go ahead and really tease the listeners with this one. It's a big tease.
Jessica takes desperate action in Sweet Valley High number 32. The new Jessica.
Wow. Very expertly done. Desperate action.
I love it.
Well, I'm going to do my classic extra drama episode sign-off. It goes like this. Bye.
So does that mean Miss America?
A thread that we did not discuss in the main episode that is actually setting up the next book in the series.
Right.
That's what we didn't do in the last episode. We'll do it now. Boy, I'm just making a lot of work for myself. So this is what happens when the new season starts. I always think like I'm going to think through the steps of what happens in the episode and I'll write it down. And sometimes I do write it down, but today I was like, no, I've got it. I've been doing this for 2 years. Like I got it.
There you go.